Are the differences we see between people just, about how they were raised? Or is there maybe something more fundamental going on? Welcome. We're going to explore the really fascinating complexities of human diversity today. We'll be focusing on what researchers call cognitive repertoire, so personality, abilities, social behaviors, all that stuff. We know you want to get a good handle on this without getting lost in the weeds, and that's what we're aiming for. Actually, we find the approach of channels like Mindful Moments really valuable here. They use AI for book analysis on YouTube, and it genuinely sparks reflection on topics just like this one. So our mission today, let's unpack this interplay between biology and society, looking at current research.
It's totally natural to think our upbringing is, well, the main thing, right? I mean, we've probably all seen how expectations, maybe based on gender, seem to push people in certain directions from early on. But while those personal experiences feel really significant, the actual hard evidence, the science linking that differential treatment directly to adult differences in personality or abilities, it's still pretty debated among researchers. Some scholars even point out we don't fully grasp how consistently parents treat sons and daughters differently, or where those differences really lie, or if mothers and fathers even take the same tack on gender stuff.
Okay, interesting. So if it's not just socialization, what else helps explain these differences?
Well, there's social role theory, which is compelling because it actually brings biology back into the picture. The idea is that society's expectations for, say, men and women can shape the traits and skills that get developed. And what's really interesting here is the concept that people might selectively recruit hormones depending on the situation.
Selectively recruit hormones. How does that work?
So think about situations involving status or competition. Testosterone might become more relevant there. Whereas in situations that emphasize bonding or caregiving, maybe oxytocin plays a bigger part. It's this interaction.
Wow. So it's not purely external pressure. Our own biology is kind of responding to social cues.
Exactly. It's a dynamic interaction between biology and psychology. We internalize these societal ideas, right? Develop our own standards, but we also adjust based on what our community expects. Like some researchers suggest, biology works with our psychology to help us fit into our social roles.
That makes sense. Like a constant conversation between our inner world and the outside world. Okay, you mentioned cognitive repertoires earlier. Can you break that down a bit? What does that term really cover?
Sure. Cognitive repertoires basically refer to that whole mix: personality traits, different abilities, how we behave socially. The key thing to remember is that these repertoires aren't really ranked from bad to good.
Ah, okay. So it's not about being better or worse overall.
Precisely. The value of a trait really depends on the context. Think about hiring someone. Super agreeable might not be best for a tough negotiator, right? And someone very assertive might struggle in a role needing lots of collaboration. Even something like high IQ, great for a research scientist maybe, but not always the most critical thing for a job focused on, say, interpersonal skills.
Right. It's about the right fit for the situation, not some single ideal way to be. So how do researchers actually measure these differences between groups? How do we quantify this stuff?
A common tool is the standard deviation. It basically gives you the average difference from the average score, the mean, like take height in the U.S. Women over 20 average around 63.6 inches, men about 69.0 inches. Standard deviation tells us how much individual heights typically spread around those averages. And to compare the size of differences across different traits, we often use something called effect sizes.
Effect sizes. Okay, so that standardizes the comparison.
Exactly. It lets us talk about whether a difference is small, medium, or large in a consistent way. But, and this is important, cognitive repertoires are usually multidimensional, lots of facets.
Right, not just one thing.
Yeah. So just averaging effect sizes across lots of individual measures, that can sometimes make the overall difference seem smaller than it really is. It's like judging the distance between two cities just by their latitude difference, ignoring the longitude.
Ah, I see. You're missing part of the picture.
You are. To get a better sense of that total distance in these complex repertoires, statisticians might use a measure called Mahalanobis-D. It's useful because it considers how different traits might be correlated. So the overall cognitive difference between groups, when you look at everything together, might actually be more significant than you'd think just looking at single traits.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about the whole pattern, the relationships between traits. So let's explore some specifics. Where does research show average differences? What about personality?
Okay, personality. Research pretty consistently shows that, on average, women tend to score higher on things like warmth, sympathy, altruism, sensitivity to others' feelings. And interestingly, some studies hint these average differences might even be more noticeable in societies with more gender equality.
Really? That seems counterintuitive.
It does a bit, yeah. One possible idea, though it's speculative, is that in more traditional societies, maybe constraints on people's freedom limit the expression of these underlying tendencies. More freedom might allow inherent traits to show through more clearly.
Huh. That's a fascinating thought. What about our senses? Any average differences there?
Yeah, in basic sensory perception, women on average tend to show slightly greater sensitivity across taste, touch, smell, and hearing. Now, the difference for any single sense might not be huge, but it's a consistent pattern. Even vision has nuances. Men tend to be better at detecting movement on average, but also have a higher rate of colorblindness. So it's definitely not as simple, one group has better senses situation. There are trade-offs.
Interesting complexities, even in something as basic as senses. Okay, what about social cognition? How we understand social stuff.
Right, social cognition, that's a whole set of abilities for navigating social interactions. Research shows some intriguing patterns here. Like in men, there often seems to be an inverse relationship between systemizing skills, understanding systems, how things work, and empathizing skills.
So good at one means less good at the other, typically for men.
Often, yeah. Men strong in systemizing tend to be less strong in empathizing on average. Finding men high in both is relatively less common, but in women, those two skill sets seem more independent. Women can be high in both, low in both, or high in one and low in the other. There's also some evidence that men might sometimes use their systemizing skills for empathy tasks, suggesting maybe different cognitive strategies are being used.
Different ways of approaching social understanding, potentially. Okay, let's shift to interests. How do interests play out, especially regarding jobs?
Big differences show up here. Using models like RAIASIC, that's realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, conventional interests, we see women, on average, leaning much more towards social occupations, while men lean more towards realistic ones. The effect sizes are quite large. This shows up in large studies, even among academically gifted kids. It fits that broader people things dimension.
People versus things.
Right.
Women, on average, show more interest in people-focused roles, men in thing-focused roles.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is, while things were converging for a while, more women entering different fields up to the 90s, the trend of women entering those traditionally things jobs seems to have kind of stalled or plateaued since then.
So removing barriers didn't lead to equal distribution, suggesting maybe preferences are playing a strong role.
It does suggest that, yeah, that even with fewer constraints, underlying average preferences might be influencing choices significantly.
Okay, what about the actual biology, the brain? Are there known average differences in brain structure or function? Neuroscientists are definitely working hard on this. It's super complex, obviously, and still developing. But studies, especially in animal models, initially have pointed to aspects of brain masculinization. Things like average differences in cell size or density in certain brain areas, how dendrites branch out, the number of synapses, even differences in non-neuronal cells like astrocytes.
And hormones. You must fit in here somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. Hormones, especially prenatal hormones, those present before birth, seem really crucial. We get insights from conditions like congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or CAH. That's where individuals with XX chromosomes get exposed to higher levels of androgens, male hormones, during development. And research shows women with CAH are more likely to identify as male or experience gender dysphoria compared to women without CAH.
Wow.
And conversely, you have complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, CAIS. These individuals have XY chromosomes, but their bodies can't respond to androgens, so they typically develop female external genitalia, are raised as girls, and their behavior generally aligns with female norms.
Those conditions really do highlight how profoundly biology, especially hormones, can influence development and identity.
They really do. And, thinking about all these complex factors, it's a good moment perhaps to mention resources like mindful moments again, and also connect it to our own explorations here. We often find that looking at these AI analyses alongside conversations like this one, it just gives a richer picture, helps understand ourselves and others better. Our previous discussions also touch on related bits of human behavior and potential. Integrating it all helps build that fuller understanding.
Absolutely. Drawing from different angles, different sources, it just leads to a more nuanced view, doesn't it? Now, you mentioned something earlier that caught my ear, greater variance in certain traits for one group versus another. Can you expand on that?
Yes, variance. It's a subtle but really important point. When you look at how scores are distributed for certain traits, think math or reading scores on big international tests like PISA or IQ scores, studies often find more variability among males compared to females. The spread of scores for boys in math and reading, for example, tends to be wider. Variance ratios are maybe around 1.16 to 1.1 year, something like that.
So more boys at the very top and very bottom of the range.
Exactly. The pattern is even clearer at the extremes of IQ. Studies like the Scottish Mental Surveys found male-to-female ratios around 2 to 1 at both very low IQs, like 60, and very high IQs, like 140. So yes, a larger proportion of males tend to fall at both the lower and the higher ends for these specific traits.
Okay, so the average might be similar, but the spread, the range, is wider for males in these instances. All right, let's touch on the classic nature versus nurture question. What about heritability in all this?
Right. Heritability. It's crucial, to be clear here. Heritability is not the same as saying a trait is inherited in the way we usually mean. It's a statistic. It tells us what proportion of the variation we see in a trait within a specific population can be linked to genetic differences within that population.
Okay, so it's about differences between people in a group, not how much of my trait is genetic.
Exactly. And importantly, heritability can change even if the genes don't. There's a great example from Norway after World War II regarding educational attainment. As access to education became much more equal across the country, the heritability of educational attainment actually increased.
Increased how?
Because the environmental factors that used to cause big differences in who got educated became less powerful, more uniform. When the environment is more equal, the remaining differences between people are more likely due to their genetic differences. We also see this with things like IQ development. Models looking at genes versus environment show that the shared environment stuff siblings experience similarly has a big impact on IQ early on, but that influence drops close to zero after around age 14.
That's a really key distinction. Heritability is about populations and depends heavily on the environment.
Precisely. So, wrapping this up, it's clear that human diversity, our cognitive repertoires, it's incredibly complex. It's really not a simple nature or nurture thing. It's this constant dynamic dance between our biological potentials and all the societal influences shaping us.
So the big takeaway really is, yes, socialization, our experiences, they matter hugely. But our biology, our inherent predispositions, they're also a massive part of the story, contributing to this amazing spectrum of human personality, ability, and behavior. It just highlights how important it is to consider all the angles and avoid those tempting oversimplifications when we think about human differences. And, as we keep learning more about genes, brains, experience, what new understandings of human potential might be just around the corner?
That is definitely a question to keep pondering.
Indeed. And on that thought, if you found this exploration interesting, please do subscribe so you don't miss future discussions on complex topics like this. Maybe share this conversation with others who you think might find it thought-provoking. While we don't have a specific link for this broad topic, we definitely encourage exploring resources like Mindful Moments for related content that can deepen your understanding. And, maybe most importantly, just keep thinking critically about all the forces that shape who we are.